Okay, so we are recording now. We reviewed what we had to do, and we also, before the recording, we reviewed what's going on over the next week, and we also reviewed what we talked about at the end of the lecture on Monday. So let's try this, another example of this. And today we're going to try two examples, and I will find a third example, and I'll load it up for practice on the website. So we talked about this genetic disorder called glucose-6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, right? So these maps are relevant to that. So glucose-6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. Okay, is the red map, okay? Or let's say the distribution of people having the distribution having glucose-6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency is shown on the red map, okay? The distribution of people having malaria is on the right map. So we'll say the green map. Your task, I'll just bring this up from down here, is what I want you to do is use the maps and natural selection to explain why glucose-6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency is the most prevalent disorder in the world. All right? So you actually have in this class gotten enough information here that you could actually hit the right mechanism. But if I was grading this, I'd be just looking for a mechanism that made sense based on this data. Does that make sense? So go ahead, let's take maybe 2 or 3 minutes and go ahead and do your 3-part answer, and then we'll talk about it. And if you have questions or anything, feel free to call me over. Let's go with one more minute. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about some of the answers here, or work our way through it. So we've got our three-part answer, right? The first part, you could number these. I could write it in a paragraph. I'm gonna go and just number them to make it clear. I'll go ahead and scoot this up so people in the back can see it as much as possible, but while still leaving the relevant part of the maps on the board. What trait is being selected for or against? Somebody's saying it louder. Glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase disorder, right? So glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase disorder. Deficiency, thank you. I was thinking that myself. It's not disorder. Deficiency. Is the trait being selected, what's the next word I put in? For, right. Okay, so something's putting natural selection pressure to cause people to be more likely to have glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency in these regions, right? Because so far what we know from the previous lecture, glucose dehydrogenase deficiency is what? Good or bad? It's bad, right? It makes you more vulnerable to certain things. You can't eat fava beans. You're vulnerable to certain infections. You can't take certain drugs, okay? So let's see what you guys came up with mechanisms. And this was hard, so if you didn't get the right mechanism, it's okay. I would care most whether you got a consistent mechanism with the data. You get full credit for a consistent mechanism in this case, whether it's the actual one or not.
Is it those where malaria is present, sickle cell is present, and so this like deficiency is part of the sickle cell where we don't get oxygen?
Okay, so you're making a good point there, right? You've heard in some other classes or someplace else that sickle cell anemia is a disease that's bad, but if you're where malaria is, it actually is good, or it's better to have sickle cell than to have malaria, right? Okay, so that's on the right track, but it's so you were saying that it was somehow linked to sickle cell anemia, and sickle cell anemia is good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would actually take that if that was explained to that level, right? Because you know the example that sickle cell anemia gives you an advantage if malaria is around, and if this was somehow linked to it, great. That'd be a good enough answer. It's not the answer, but it's Nick.
Glucose 6 somehow provides some sort of resistance against malaria, so it's being selected for.
Yes. Yes, so sickle cell anemia provides some sort of resistance. So if you're in an area where there's malaria, it's better to have, oh, I said sickle cell, didn't I? I said glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency provides some sort of resistance to malaria, right? So it's, once again, like sickle cell anemia, it's better to have this, okay? That's a correct answer, not specific enough to be the perfect one, but that would have gotten, both of your answers would have gotten full credit, okay? Because they were both consistent with the data, yes.
I was thinking there's a third variable, like the diet that we talked about, the oxidants.
Okay, so there are oxidants you could have or something like that that might be related. Um, yeah, I don't know about diet where people eat fava beans. I'm not sure. I might be able to, I would have to come up with some, I would have to link that diet with the glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency and then somehow make it protective against malaria. I'm not sure what that link is.
Because the normal function of dehydrogenase is to recharge our antioxidants and stuff.
Yeah.
Malaria probably has some effect on it.
I feel really bad about making you answer this, but keep going.
I raised my hand.
No, keep going.
On the antioxidant system, that is corrected. I assume it overcharges it, and so dehydrogenase deficiency helps fix that or something.
It's related to the antioxidant system. Okay, so I'll give you the answer now. Okay, so the full answer, and once again, in terms of grading, I'm only concerned that you have something consistent with the data. So we had other answers that were, is that when glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase, that's the enzyme, right, is not functional, the blood is more oxidizing. Okay, the parasite that causes malaria is actually vulnerable to oxidants. Okay, so thus people with glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency are less likely to get malaria, or possibly they just get a less severe case. And they are more healthy overall. Okay, so they can't eat certain things, can't take certain drugs, they're in trouble if they get a bacterial infection, but that's better than having malaria. All right, then the consequences of that are what?
That's on the deficiency tree.
Yeah, people with glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency are more likely to survive and reproduce and pass on their glucose 6 dehydrogenase deficiency genes. Does that make sense? Okay. I want to once again stress that probably nobody got this fully nailed that, right? But there were several good and acceptable answers that would have earned full credit because they were consistent with the data. Make sure that when you do these, or a couple things, make sure that you're looking at the question and you are addressing the question, right? Whatever that question may be. Let me talk about one other thing that I didn't see here. Actually, let's talk about the answer first. Okay. Make sure your answers don't seem to indicate that the gene becomes, or the phenotype becomes created by natural selection. Okay. Let's say the phenotype, because we're talking. Okay, so for example, for this one, don't say malaria causes glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. Okay. Does that make sense? Malaria causes people who have glucose 6 dehydrogenase deficiency to be more likely to survive, but it doesn't cause them to get it, if that makes sense, right? It's the same thing as giraffes didn't grow longer necks to reach leaves, right? Giraffes with longer necks were more likely to reach leaves and be able to survive and have offspring with long necks. If you've heard of that example. Okay, and then here, just for your enjoyment, this is the picture of the malarial parasite. That's Plasmodium falciparum, which I am pronouncing incorrectly, I've been told, and I never managed to get it right. So, that's basically. So that's the parasite. Here's some red blood cells, and here it is breaking out of those. Okay, it's pretty bad, and a lot of the damage caused actually by it is, you bust up red blood cells, then you have pieces of cells that stick in capillaries, you end up with blood clots. I mean, there's lots of problems associated with it. Okay, let's try another one. I might have to read this one to you. Can you guys in the back see it? Bigger? I can make it bigger. Actually, I can make it bigger, and I'll just make it not as wide. Let's try that. Is that big enough? You can just shake your head no in the back. Okay. All right. So decades ago, I'll read it to you. And by the way, you could be writing frantically right now. These notes are posted. Do not want to give you some time to work on this. Spend time writing this down. Okay? Notes are posted. So decades ago, 10 Italian wall lizards were accidentally introduced to the island of Mr. Caru, from a neighboring island. The old island contained an abundance of mosquitoes that made up the bulk of the diet for the lizard. On the new island, geology and climate resulted in heavy vegetation only at higher elevations. Mosquitoes do not do well at high elevation, and so they were very few on the island. Several Italian wall lizards were recently captured on Pod Mr. Caru and then dissected. Okay, so they went back. These lizards got left on the island by accident. Lizards bred and reproduced and things like that. Years later, some scientists come back and they take a few and sample them, right? Scientists found leaves in their stomachs and cecal valves absent in the old lizards. So the old lizards don't have cecal valves. The ones on this island do, okay? Or they mostly don't have cecal valves. Cecal valves separate parts of the digestive tract from one another and slow the passage of food. In 5 sentences or fewer, you're going to see me do this a lot. Use natural selection to explain the observed cecal valves in the lizards on Pod Mr. Caru. Remember how to do your full credit description. Okay? It's an old quiz question, but we're going to use it in practice. So let's go ahead and let's take 5 minutes and do that one. So remember, the conditions can't cause the phenotype, right? That's an important mistake people make with this one off.
Is the old island, so the new island is Pod?
Yes.
The old island is where they came from before?
Yes. Anybody want more time? Not? Yes, I'd like more time. Okay, let's go and talk about this one. All right, so what is our trait that we are selecting for? Phenotype, okay. So the phenotype being selected is the presence of cecal valves. Selected for is the presence of cecal valves. And really, whether it's a for or against is going to be how the problem's written, right? This question says to explain the observed cecal valves, right? So we're a for. All right, mechanism of selection. I'm going to let you save your voice. Neeb?
Yeah, I said the lizards that possess cecal valves can extract more nutrients from vegetation as it takes longer to digest the food than the lizards without cecal valves.
Yes. Okay. And they're more likely to survive, right? Or that might be the consequence. These can blend together. So I'm not going to look at these three things and go, oh, you put that part there and that part there, and that's wrong, right? You could even just stick it in one big paragraph and it's fine. I just want to make sure all the pieces are there. Okay. So we said the lizards with cecal valves were able to extract more nutrients from their food, right? Due to the slower digestion. Okay, you want to be careful there. That this is where you want to be careful you don't talk about somehow natural selection made the cecal valves. Okay, either one of those lizards that got dropped off had cecal valves, okay, or some mutation happened along the way that caused cecal valves to happen, but natural selection didn't. That's not what natural selection does. Yes?
I don't know if this is wrong, but I also said because it takes longer to digest, they don't need to eat as much. Did I say that?
That could be.
I think if the longer digesting plants slower is good because it's harder to get nutrients out of them. That's why cows have 4 stomachs.
Right. So it would depend on the full phrasing there. So I mean, you want to indicate that they're getting more nutrients overall.
Yeah.
That's you want to make sure that's what's being indicated. Then they're getting more nutrients overall than a lizard that doesn't have the cecal valves. Okay, because that's what would cause them to. I mean, this is kind of always the same answer. Thus, doesn't have to start with thus, but I like thus. Thus, lizards with cecal valves are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their cecal valve genes to their offspring. Questions? Yes?
So for the second, like the discussion part, do you want us to put a comparison in there, like compare the lizards with the cecal valves to them without? Or would you be okay with just explaining why the phenotype is so bad?
It would be a little more. So, if you're taking a lizard test and you have plenty of time, you could add that. That would be more descriptive. That the lizards with cecal valves were able to extract more nutrients from their food compared to. That's probably a better way to say it. Why don't I add that? Compared to lizards without cecal valves food. And that would make it really super clear. So that is a better answer. And depending on how you wrote your answer with your words, if it was really clear that you had it, you get full credit. But depending on different arrangements of words there, maybe it wouldn't be as clear, if that makes sense. And so this might save you. All right, so there are definitely cases where if you're limited to 5 sentences on this quiz because I didn't want to have to read, a page in the front of the page and the back of the page. But if you can, your 5 sentences can make it as clear as possible, that helps. So good point. Any other questions about natural selection or how to answer these questions? I've really broken this down, and what I've taught this class like more than 20 times. And so if you see me breaking something down this much, it means that there are common mistakes people have made over the last 20 years. And I'm trying to save you from that. Yes?
You mentioned that about the vegetation.
Hmm?
I kind of have the same idea as Sophia, is that they can survive off of fewer mosquitoes. Is there one correct answer with both of them?
As long as both work, so they would need fewer mosquitoes because they were making up for the lack of mosquitoes with more leaves. As long as that was clear, as long as it was clear to me that they were getting more nutrients than, in this case, than the other lizards, the cecal valve lizards compared to the non-cecal valve lizards, that would be fine. Like I said, everybody doesn't have to have the same answer, but the answer has to be consistent with the data given. Any other questions? Okay, great. We're going to go on and we're going to start talking then about, we're going to talk about intermolecular forces and we're going to talk about water. Okay. So we are now getting into chapter 2. I might loop back and do something for chapter 1 if I think of something I forgot, like I just did. I didn't write in my notes, but I was thinking about it in the shower. So we've got this equation, okay? We've got the free energy equation looks like this. And and so we've got Q, which is the reaction quotient, right? And remember the reaction quotient looked like this. So if we had A plus B goes to C plus D, okay, that our reaction quotient was products over reactants. Concentration of products over concentration of reactants. Okay. And then we have this special case where I asked you a couple times, that there was a reason for that. What happens to delta G here when you're at equilibrium? What's the driving force? It's 0, right? So this goes to 0. What are these concentrations equal to when you're at equilibrium? They're not equal to each other. Common misconception there. They're equal to whatever value of ratios you need to make the equilibrium constant, right? So KEQ it's the concentrations of everything, but at equilibrium, they're equal to the equilibrium constant. which doesn't mean that they are, let me scoot this up a little bit, which doesn't mean that they are all equal or there's only one possible set of values there, right? You have to have a set of values, equilibrium constant is some number, okay? And they have to, all those values have to, when you multiply the 2 on the top and divide by the 2 on the bottom, you get that number, okay? So what that means is in this special case when we're at equilibrium, the free energy change is 0 and KEQ is our equilibrium constant there. So if I was to rewrite this in green just for fun, whoops, it's going to look like this. KEQ. All right. And so I can move one of these, I can move this piece to the other side, right? I can subtract that piece of the equation from both sides is what I'm actually doing in algebra when I do that. And so I'd get negative RT ln of KEQ is equal to the standard free energy, right? And then this is usually written the other way. It's written with a delta G on this side. And I'll move this up again. So remember seeing that? Have you seen this equation? You probably saw it in Gen Chem. So here, this allows us to relate the standard free energy, standard biochemical free energy in this case, to the equilibrium constant. So if you know one, you can calculate the other, if you know the temperature. All right, you should be able to use that equation as well. I'm not going to plug things in. This is just a simple case if I give you, how many things do we have here? We have 3 things in that equation. I'd give you 2 of them and ask you give me the other one. We have 3 variables in the equation. Questions on that? Okay. All right. Here we go. We've got 2 sets of pieces of meat here. Which one looks tastier? How many? I used to eat meat, so I still can think about what looks tasty. But how about the one on the right? How many people would rather eat the one on the right than the one on the left? How many people would rather eat the one on the left than the one on the right? Okay. Pretty much everybody said that. Give me the natural selection. I'm going to do it anyway. Give me the natural selection reason, just real quick. Give me the mechanism, right, for why you all like the one on the left, and I do too.
I think our body has enzymes that or we lack enzymes to break down molecules, so therefore we get sick.
Okay.
So
Okay. So the mechanism is that we lack the enzymes to break down raw food, and so if we were to eat this, we would get sick, and so some of the time at least, right? And then if we eat this, we don't get as sick, so we spend less of our time sick if we're eating this rather than that, right? And so our ancestors who spent less of their time being sick, right, were more likely to survive and reproduce and pass on their charred meat liking genes. Okay, that's a good explanation. Now, in terms of it's a little more. I'm going to just explain a little bit more of that. So actually, we don't lack the enzymes, but we're able to get more nutrients out of this than that. When you cook something, it's broken down, and so if you can get more nutrients out of it, you're more likely to survive, right? If something got on this meat, bad got on this meat, you're chasing a deer down, you kill a deer, you don't eat all the deer all at once, right? So it sits around for a while, maybe you get some bad bacteria on it. It might make you sick. If you cook the outside, you kill all those bacteria. So that's another reason as well. So you could come up with a number of different reasons why we all like this, pretty much. It might be that a couple people don't, but most people like this compared to that. So another good natural selection question. Just blew another one that I might have been able to use on the quiz, but that's not what this is actually about. So we all like this. Well, what I want to talk about is cooking this. Okay, why when I look at this right here, why is this meat cooked on the outside and raw on the inside? okay? What goes on with those reactions? And what we've got here is the reactions on the outside of the food. Does anybody know what that's called? What those reactions are in cooking? They're the Maillard reactions, which looks like Maillard. We'll go down and look at it. So these are Maillard reactions. It's French. I know how to say it because I watch cooking shows, okay? But, and what these reactions are is they're reactions that occur when you heat food or heat anything, right? That contains a sugar and it contains amino acids essentially. So if you have sugar and amino acids, what you can do is you can run various reactions. They're going to give you these aromatic compounds. And it's these trace amounts, or maybe not so trace amounts, of aromatic compounds that give cooked meat that flavor that we like on the outside. All right. Now the trick with these reactions, and I'm not showing, we've got some reactions here. We're not going to worry about mechanisms from getting to here to there because they're complex. But the trick here is Maillard reactions only occur at temperatures above, say, 120 degrees Celsius. So we're in a science class, so we're going to use the Celsius scale when we talk about things, even for this cooking stuff. All right. And by the way, if you're cooking food and you get that food to 70 degrees Celsius, you essentially kill all the microorganisms in it. So if you want to cook something, you want to be safe from getting sick from like bacteria poisoning. So food poisoning that's bacterial caused. It needs to get set to 70 degrees. And it needs to get to 70 degrees inside. Okay, that's the tough thing. So why is it safe to, so if I'm cooking a burger, I have to get the inside of that burger up to 70 degrees. Okay, if I get it up to 70 degrees, the inside is not going to be pink. All right, that's pink. Why can I eat a burger? Why can't I safely eat a burger? I mean, you can probably safely eat it for a while. Eventually, you're going to get it, right? But why do I have to worry about a burger that hasn't gotten to 70 degrees inside, but the steak I don't worry about?
Because the ground beef, like the outside, the bacteria cannot be on the inside of it.
Right. So ground beef is you take beef and you grind it up. So the outside, right, whatever awful stuff's on the outside in the slaughterhouse gets into the inside. So you have to get that inside cooked. Whereas you can eat a rare steak because the outside never got to the inside. They're not bacteria just living in here. They get kind of splashed on the outside. And any bacteria that were on the outside of that are going to get killed when you cook it because you get up to 120 degrees at least on the outside. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So how is this related to water? Well, you guys remember your heating curve for water? Remember heating curves? All right. So we've got heat and we've got temperature over here. And we could start our temperature real low. Let's go minus 20. We'll go 0. We'll have 100 right here, degrees Celsius, and we can have above that. So let's say I take a piece of ice out of the freezer and I start to heat it. What's going to happen to it? The temperature is going to start going up, right? It's going to remain ice until the temperature gets to what? To 0 degrees Celsius, right? So this is ice. And then here, you're right, whoever said water, here it starts becoming water, right? Okay, so this is, while we're at 0, what do I have? I have water. So if we think about water as the liquid, right? And I also have ice. Because water freezes at 0. I have a mixture of ice and water there. And then, eventually it all becomes liquid water, and then what happens?
Evaporates.
Doesn't evaporate yet. What happens on our curve, our heating curve? It starts, right, the temperature can start going up again. And the temperature goes up until it gets, and so now it's all water. I'll just put a little liquid here and a little liquid here. And then at 100 degrees, what happens? It becomes, goes out this way. Okay. And what was that? Yep. And now we have gas, or we could just say steam right here. We're going to have a mixture of steam and liquid water. And then once all of it becomes steam, what happens? It can start going up again, right? So now we have steam. So what 120 degrees about here, right? On my chart. All right, so 120 degrees is about there on my chart. Where do we get our Browning reactions? About 120 degrees. So what has to happen for us to get to that temperature? You have to get rid of the water, right? You have to get rid of the water. So when you're cooking, getting rid of water is a really big part of what you're doing. And as long as there's a bunch of water around, you're not going to get these Maillard reactions, right? Because as long as you've got a bunch of water around, you can't get above 100 degrees. So if I make a stew, let's say, and I chop up the meat raw and I throw it in the stew, do you ever see browning on the outside of that meat? No. So if you want those flavors, you have to do what? You have to fry it in a pan first, then chop it up, then throw it in the stew if you want those flavors. Does that make sense? Okay. I want to draw your attention to something here, though. I sort of drew this to scale. So here we have this kind of long line with the amount of heat. I probably haven't gotten these quite to scale, right? This certainly should be steeper. Actually, this should be twice as steep as that. But we've got a long line here where we're melting the water, right? We're melting the ice. And then we've got an even longer line here where we're turning it to steam, okay? And what we're doing is it takes a lot of energy to take water and turn it from a liquid into steam. So what we do is we say water has a high heat of fusion. No, vaporization, sorry. Fusion's the other one. All right, so it takes a lot of energy to take this steam water and turn it into, or take this water and turn it into steam. I think it's about if I remember correctly, it's over 5 times as much energy to take a given quantity of water, say a gram of water, and turn it into steam as it takes to raise it from 0 to 100 degrees Celsius. This is also why steam burns really hurt. So anybody ever get a steam burn like from your iron? It hurts like heck, doesn't it? Right? And it's because when that steam hits your hand, let's say it's on your hand, when that steam hits your hand, the water condenses on your hand and gives up all this heat and burns you. And it also gives up some of this too, but it's really, this is the largest amount. Okay?
Wait, it does what?
What was that?
What happens?
When the steam hits your hand, the water condenses and it gives off a lot of heat, which burns you. And that lot of heat is because it takes so much energy to turn that water into steam. You get all that energy back when it lands on your hand. Okay? Other questions? Okay. So why is that? The heat of fusion is also pretty big compared to the heat of fusion is almost as much as this heat is. So for a gram of water, it takes almost as much energy to melt it as it does to heat it from 0 to 100 degrees Celsius. Okay, haven't exactly fully represented it there, but so we've got that, and that's why ice is good at cooling your drink, right? But as organisms, we're not usually, there's not a lot of organisms I know about that actually are using that ice bit, right? But you actually will use this you'll use this efficiently to help cool yourself. How is that?
Sweat.
Sweat, right. When I sweat, right, I get liquid on me. When that liquid turns to steam, essentially steam, it's not turning to steam at 100 degrees, right? But when that liquid evaporates, right, it takes a lot of heat away with it, okay? So if you're all sweaty and stuff like that and you want to cool off, you shouldn't be wiping the sweat off of yourself. Just let it evaporate off. If you have lots of water, don't worry about it. Okay, so let's look at why this is. Why is that the case? If I was to draw water in water, right, water looks like this. And if I put water in water, I'm just going to surround this. This is going to be a 2D image. This would actually be in 3 dimensions, and it would be a tetrahedral arrangement, but we're not going to worry about that for now. All right, so you can imagine this water in the middle. What we get is we get hydrogen bonding, right? We get hydrogen bonding between this water and 4 waters around it. Essentially, we have 2 lone pairs here on this oxygen that are going to be interacting with each hydrogen. And if we have ice, so in ice, we have 4, each water has an average of 4 hydrogen bonds. So we can see this water, has 4 hydrogen bonds, right? Each of these would have 4 hydrogen bonds to waters I haven't drawn. So in ice, water has 4 hydrogen bonds. In liquid water, actually each water. In liquid water, each water has, how many do you think? I was surprised when I learned this. Not 12? So is it going to be, let's think about it, is it going to be more or less per water for liquid water? Less, right? Because liquid water, the molecules can move relative to each other. How many do you think? 2. Might be what I thought. Yep. 1, maybe 1. It's actually 3.5 hydrogen bonds. So you've got the water moving around past other waters, but really, most of the time, they're fully hydrogen bonded to other waters. Okay? I mean, water does flow. It doesn't make it not flow, but it's not a whole lot of difference there. But still, breaking that half a bond on average is going to absorb a lot of heat if it's ice, right? That cools down your drink really nicely. Okay. In steam, liquid water has how many hydrogen bonds?
Yeah.
Not liquid water. In steam, water, each water what happens to my water molecules? So my water molecules in liquid water are like this. In ice are like this. In liquid water, they're like this. What happens to my water molecules in steam? Right? They go way apart. Okay? So how many hydrogen bonds? 0, right. So you take those, to go from liquid water to steam, you take those 3.5 hydrogen bonds and you break all of them. That absorbs a ton of heat when you're sweating, okay? Or when you get the steam burn, it releases a ton of heat back to you when they come together and make those hydrogen bonds. That actually brings up a good point. I want to stress something that will always be the case in chemistry. Not everything can I always say it's true, okay? When you make bonds, right? I'm making hydrogen bonds when the waters come back together. Energy is always released, okay? When you break bonds, energy is always absorbed. Okay, we want to think about that when we think about what's going on in given reactions. Now, you may have previously heard, or your textbook, I think your textbook is probably going to be careful with this, but you certainly may have read it in textbooks and things that ATP has a high energy bond, right? And when you break the bonds for ATP, it releases energy. It does not. When you the actual act of breaking the bond does not release energy. It takes energy. But then when you break ATP apart into ADP and phosphate, waters come in and things and make new hydrogen bonds that weren't there before. And those bonds are what release the energy. Okay, so it's the overall reaction that releases energy. But it is always the case when you make bonds, energy is released. And when you break bonds, you have to put in energy to break those bonds. Does that make sense? Okay. Great. You guys have a great couple days here. If anybody wants to see me this afternoon, please come up now and let me know.